welcome. Thank you for joining me during lunch because I know that you have other things you could do, people to socialize, stickers to get, but you came here, so I appreciate that. My name is Jess Hall. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Ops Canvas. It's a little bit of a lineup change in job since I booked this gig. So we're a DevOps orchestration platform. So if you work in the world of DevOps and infrastructure and you're interested in doing a research interview with me, I would love to talk to you, and I will show you where we can connect a little bit later. So someone's going to tell you, you need an AI strategy, so you think, oh, I also need a data strategy, but I probably need a marketing strategy and a technology strategy and sales and marketing and finance and HR, and no one wants to be left out. Everyone wants to have a strategy. Everyone wants to be strategic. So what happens with that is that it gets a little wonky, that all of a sudden we have a bunch of departments and leaders and initiatives competing for the same bucket of money, time, and effort. And I get it. So when everyone has their own strategy, we're not going to be able to move forward as an organization. We really need one ring to rule them all. And the funny thing about AI is that we've kind of gotten to this idea that it is like magic and pixie dust. I didn't come up with this. It was Todd Olson from Pendo. But like when all these things came out, like it is the iconography and the language of magic. And what's funny is it only took a few months for research to show that people actually downgraded the value of products that said they were AI related. Now that research, and I've got a link for you later, was principally focused at consumer products, but already we're starting to sense that like, yeah, this whole thing isn't cracked up to what it is. So while investors, and when I'm involved in investor conversations, we're talking about AI, a lot of what we're doing, we're talking to customers, we're talking to partners, is about what can we do, what can we create that is useful and valuable with AI. So we don't need an AI strategy. You don't need one. Lots of people will try to sell you one. Lots of consultants will try to sell you one. I've been a consultant. I was a consultant until February. I get it, but we don't need an AI strategy. What we need to be able to really think strategically is how can AI help us achieve our objectives? What can we do with AI? So when I was a consultant, I used to go around an organization. And the first thing I would do is talk to everyone I could possibly find. And I would say, in the next 3 months, what are your most important priorities? I would ask this of every leader, of every engineer, every marketer, every customer success salesperson. So I'm curious as to how you would answer this. So raise your hand if your answer would sound something like synergy, digital transformation, and leverage. Anybody? Oh, okay, we got a couple. All right, how about what the CEO wants? You try to make it work, but like it would come out blah, 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 buzzword. Really, we just want what that dude wants. Last one. Would you laugh at me if I asked this? Because this has happened in real life. Real life, I've gone into companies to help them and asked what the priorities were, and people laughed at me. Well, you guys are nice, because you wouldn't do that. Could anyone at their company actually tell me, with some level of clarity, what your strategy is? Anyone? Oh, okay. That's a little rough. But I like to think about strategy, we're going back to Roger Martin and A.G. Lafley, is where do we play and how do we win? Two really basic questions. What customers do we want to serve? How do we want to do this so that we can be effective? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we've got the best thing, but we have the unique thing. So when it comes to how do we win, what is our unique value proposition? What are our differentiators? With AI, it's like, how can we compete with hyperscalers who have billions and billions of dollars when we do not? And the trick here, whoops, hold on. So when I'm going to an organization and I want to say, Is your strategy good? My question is, can your team use your strategy to make decisions on a regular basis? I can't tell you if it's good or bad. I can't tell you if it's right or wrong. Time will tell. But the one thing we can know is if you go around your organization and people actually use it to make decisions. When you're doing your weekly grooming meetings, your prioritization meetings, when marketing is planning the social media calendar for the next year, for the next month, is your team actually using your strategy to make decisions? And if they're not, you have a problem. Because the reality is most organizations suck at strategy. Like they really do. Every leader says their job is to be strategic and have the vision and do all the things. And most of them, they just are terrible. There's two reasons why they could be terrible. One of them is profoundly easier to fix than the other. One is that they just don't articulate it particularly well. If you got lucky and you had a coffee with the CEO and they had 5 to 6 minutes to explain it to you, you would get it and you would be fired up to go do those things. But it's not well communicated, it's not regularly communicated, and so people in your organization are kind of left adrift and they don't know what to do. The other one that's harder to fix is, frankly, if your strategy is so mealy-mouthed that it doesn't help people make decisions. So a lot of people like to use the classic example of Southwest, right? We use a certain kind, Southwest back in the day. I know there's been some recent things, right? Southwest back in the day was, we only fly to certain types of airports, we only have certain types of planes, we only do these kinds of things. That is our strategy. There are service organizations who will not get out of bed for less than $1 million contract. That's a strategy too. And these things are clear and they're helping make decisions. If you're trying to serve small and medium businesses, you probably can't also serve the enterprise well. You're gonna have to pick one. And a lot of times where people get themselves into trouble with strategy is they don't want to pick one. They want to do all the things. And because of that, that creates confusion in your organization. So at this point, you're probably pissed at me because you're like, you said that we need to be strategic and serve the organization's goals. And, oh, by the way, most organizations are terrible at this, and I don't actually know what's going on in my organization. Not a single person raised their hand when I asked that question, so what are you going to do? I've got the two quick answers, and then I'm going to come back to it a little bit later. So we can look for clues, right? There's probably some leadership emails. There's somebody who knows what's going on. There's like a right-hand person. So you might be able to get at some of these things by finding the right person or finding the right information and asking about it. The other thing is that you can kind of guess what you think it is and take it to your leadership and say, hey, I think the strategy is this. And if you're earnest in saying that you want that kind of clarification, you might get by. That might be something to do. The other thing is, if there is nothing, chances are what your company is trying to do is make money, save money, or not get sued. So if what you're focusing on is going to do one of those things, you might be in good shape. So what we want to do is, instead of saying, do we need an AI strategy, is how to be strategic about AI. So there's some general questions that we can ask, but we know these are the common AI opportunities. We've got automation, so being able to reduce repetitive manual work. So a lot of people are seeing this with, claims. I know a lot of people work in the medical space. They're using this to analyze claims or do pre-authorizations. So insurance companies are doing loads of pre-authorizations every day. They're pretty formulaic. We can automate that. Great. Insights, so analytics and decision support. If you get a mammogram, that mammogram is going to get read by a computer to do two things, not just only to see if it can detect that you might have at risk for breast cancer, but now they can use the same data and the same imaging to see if you might have a risk of a heart attack. So AI insights are, in this one actually, there's a lot going on in this area. You can process a lot more information. You can look at a lot of more characteristics. So insights is another area. Error prevention, can we prevent something? So at Ops Canvas, where I work, we have tools to say, hey, you probably want to not run that deployment because there's some security risks. Or hey, you need to get permission for this deployment because that is going to be $20,000 a month on your cloud bill, and you actually only have a signing limit of about $5,000. So we're going to have to do something. So we're going to prevent you from taking this step. And sometimes you can be right and sometimes you can be wrong. But error prevention is an interesting one. And then recommendations, Spotify's Dayist, whatever that thing is, it's like moody Saturday night for a depressed middle-aged woman. I'm like, what are you people doing? It's like, you're sad Thursday. It seems to think that I'm very sad, or that I really love Disney television specials movies, and I guarantee you that's because my daughters really are into Descendants, even though it makes my ears hurt. But, I would like to see us evolve past, like, I like this versus my kids are making me listen to this in the car, which means that perhaps my parenting is a challenge. The other couple of things that are questions that you might want to ask, I like these, they came from Ethan Mollick. I thought I had a slide about them, apparently not. So what can we not do? What do we do that's no longer valuable with AI? So there may have been a time where, when I was coming up, everyone said, write the notes from the meeting. Like that was the way you would distinguish yourself, right? Like you would go through the meeting, you would have the best notes, you would really capture what was said and what was decided. And that was one way to show your capabilities. I get a summary of every meeting I'm in from AI. So that thing is no longer valuable. And then the question is like, what can we do now that we couldn't do before? So what is impossible but is now feasible? So the example he used was, if you're a BCG, Bain, McKinsey, you're a high-end management consultant, you are really working on very expensive engagements, very high-ticket clients. Well, maybe somebody who's one tier down, who couldn't typically afford you, would love to be able to get some of that insight at a more affordable cost. So you could go down market, you could go into an adjacent area. The other one is, what can we democratize or personalize? So what can we make more available? So I remember years ago working on a project with an anesthesiologist, and they kind of scared the crap out of you because they said, oh yeah, we just kind of make things up. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. And they wanted to create a system that would be able to be in the operating theater where the anesthesiologist who had data about like your height, your weight, your medical conditions, if you had any allergies, to say like, what is the recommended protocol, so that they could kind of compare and contrast. That sounds like an awesome thing. I sincerely hope somebody's done that. So has anyone seen these graphs? I guess I'm curious. Two, I think they called two different things, but in the world of AI, they work out pretty interestingly. Now, back in the day, we had to ship code to deliver value. And you had to like run a deployment, and like Friday night, and I get woken up at 2 a.m. to do user acceptance testing. That was so much fun, let me tell you. And now we can, with CI/CD and everything else, we can run those deployments pretty easily, but we still have to ship code to production in order to generate value. But once your model is in production, that's actually where a lot of the work begins. And a lot of value can be generated from once we put a model into production. So the virtuous circle on the left, this is Andrew Ng. By the way, I have a link at the end. All the slides, all the citations, all the resources are already online, so you'll be able to get to all that. He came in his AI transformation playbook, he talks about this idea. If we have a better product, then there'll be more users, which means we have more data, which means everything gets more accurate and things get better. Which actually remind me of something that came out many years before, which is in Jim Collins' book, and he also had a additional follow-up. It was in Good to Great, but then he put out another thing about the flywheel. And so this is the Amazon flywheel, and the idea here was, well, if we lower prices, we'll improve the customer experience. If we improve that, we'll get more traffic and more sellers, which means we'll have more selection. So that you get these ideas of what is a flywheel. How can you, in your organization, what is the opportunity that you have to create a flywheel? And so imagine that you have a good product that's in market today, like a SaaS tools, and you're attracting clients, which means you have data. So like an ADP is running payroll for how many companies around the world? They have a ton of payroll data. They were using that to manually go in and get insights for like reports and things like that, but I have that. And if I go out and attract new customers, now I have all this data, what can I do with it? And I continue to come along. Now, this does not work if you skip the investment that's most going to piss off your team, which is in monitoring and evals. So a lot of people are investing heavily in the front end of an AI project, and you are cheaping out at the end. So monitoring, how are we actually going to think about what and make sure this is here? How are we going to develop evals that say, hey, is that actually a good answer, or is that a crummy answer, and maybe we should think about doing something differently? So let's talk a little bit about what makes for a good AI use case. I think the most wonderfully visualized one is from Cassie Koskorov. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce her name. She has a ton of great classes about ML and AI learning online. I certainly recommend them. She likes to make you think of it as like a drunk island where everyone has laptops and they can do jobs that they don't have to think about that much. And so the other thing is, you have to think about what is the right job to give these people. How do I want them to do the job? And then how am I going to judge that they're actually doing a good job? So this is the way I like to think about it. I've done 2 years of research with ML and AI experts, doing lots and lots of interviews, talking to people in lots of different industries and different projects. Without fail, the number one thing they tell me all the time is the use case being well-defined and a solid use case makes all the difference in the project. They are clamoring for this, right? And so what makes for a good AI use case, which by the way, I've also validated all these things that I said. You can't take the UX researcher out of the girl, apparently. And so one is we've got a clear value for the business and the customer. And that can be expressed really easily. You think, yeah, duh. Yeah, you'd be surprised at how many people can't do this. Then do we have unique data or unique customer or market understanding? If we have unique data or we really understand this industry or this job in a really deeper way, we will be able to fend off the competition better. The next one is, do we have baseline performance? Do we have a general sense of how we're doing? So if we don't know how we're doing, that doesn't mean that it's terrible for AI. What it means is that we need to be doing an analytics project first and establishing that baseline. We got to know what we're starting from. Because if we don't, we're not going to know if we actually made it better or worse. We have no touchstones. The next is lots of examples. So when my girls were really little, they loved these picture books, right? And they had like all these different cats or all these different dogs or all these different shapes or colors or toys. And they would just like flip through them and talk to them for hours. Essentially, that's how a machine learns too, is by comparing all of these examples. In many cases, you want to use AI for something because it's easier to show rather than tell. Because if you could tell, you could just write a pretty simple piece of code that would handle that. So we do need a lot of those examples, and that's why someone like Fei-Fei Li was such an important innovator in the space by investing in ImageNet and other resources to make sure we had good quality data out there. And there's a lot of people doing some important work. And the last is that it has to be done with AI. Because if you can do it with traditional software engineering, you absolutely should. It is cheaper and faster and more accurate. So I know about a a health company, and I've talked to them about it, and they built this really big Gen AI model that they were really excited about. And they've since decommissioned it because good old-fashioned robotic process automation, which has been around for a long time, is better, cheaper, and faster. So if you can do it with something simpler, you really should. You're going to save yourself a lot of money and headache. Now, the problem is the reason why they wanted to use the Gen AI model is the investors liked it. So it is a little tricky because AI is a way to attract investment and it feels like unique intellectual property. And so I think it's about figuring out what are the right ways to have something that is AI powered and that's using AI in smart ways. We use a lot of AI to look at deployment logs and some of the information about your infrastructure to make recommendations. And there's a ton of observations and those are things we can do. But in other places, no, we're not going to use it because it doesn't make sense. And so those are what I kind of think of as a good AI use case. Okay, here's the opposite. Again, if you can do it with traditional software engineering, and yes, it makes me feel old to say traditional software engineering. Not a good use. If there's no identifying patterns, right? Not a good AI use case. We don't have a sense of a baseline. We have nothing to compare it to. Probably not going to make work or absolute precision. And you tend to see this in some of the medical ones or maybe like air traffic control. Where we work is on the Potomac River. So that was nearby. And then last is the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Because when we're talking about an AI project, we are talking about projects that are expensive and risky and time consuming. And it will take you longer to figure out you're in trouble than it would with like a typical project, right? So you've got to go into this thing, and we'll talk more about how to get ready for that there. So we're going to play a game. I have two scenarios for you, and you guys are going to like let me know. Okay, so security threat detection. A company wants to flag potential security risk. They do have detailed deployment logs and AWS console data, although the console is super hard to use. They haven't defined what a security risk looks like, and there's no analysis of past breaches to train AI. So what do we got? All right. Okay, I got a lot of down thumbs. All right, does anybody think this is a good idea? Okay. But, okay, why?
Well, you may be able to make a model of what is good without knowing what's bad and then try to find outliers. But that requires that research up front. Can we really do this?
Yep, so you might need some research up front. You might need to clarify some things. All right, right up in the front.
You said there wasn't a baseline? There's been no analysis of past breaches or anything like that?
Yep. So yeah, I don't know that we're going to have a good baseline. They don't know what success looks like. What could make this a bet? Like, imagine for a minute, these people are your client, and you're a consultant, or you just joined this team. What can we do to make this better? Other data?
What you mentioned about ADP, right?
Yeah.
If you're helping an HR firm, you're going to use kind of
De-identified?
Data. So help them establish what a good risk would look like, what a good breach or what a breach would look like. Give them that baseline.
Yeah.
And then help them to feed in their own data.
Yep. So you could go, I'm recapping for anyone who can't hear you. So great idea. We need more data. Could we go to an ADP where we might have some additional existing data, and then we can kind of compare that into a way to identify risks? Anybody else got an idea of a way we can make this better? Yeah, right here in the front.
Better definition about potential security risk.
Yeah. So we could have a better definition about who the users were. This could be a good case for like an ontology. So essentially that's kind of what we're talking about. Like here's a definition of what are what are typically security risks, what they typically look like. And that might give us a generalized sense of something might be good or bad. I think I've gotten really into ontologies lately. And that might be a good place to start, but we're definitely going to want to try and get some more specific data about what's happening in this set. Good news is that because they're running deployments, they're probably getting a ton of things on a regular basis. Okay, we're trying another one. Here we go. Oops, sorry, that was loud. Okay, sales forecasting. A B2B company wants AI to predict which deals will close. Wait a minute. Somebody did not QA her slides right. Hold on. Whoops. Did I make another? No, I really screwed that up. Okay. So here it is. Years of CRM data on past wins and losses. Sales reps log activity inconsistently, and the sales process changed significantly last year. So what's our verdict? We got a middling. We got a thumbs up, and we got a thumbs down, another thumbs down. We have less hands, which is either because I've confused you with the slide that you're sharing, or this. But do you mind telling us why you think it was right?
I think this is just a prediction with the CRM data. So
Yeah.
if you predict it incorrectly, there is no bigger risk.
Yeah. So that's an interesting way of thinking about it. So what you said was that it's a CRM, so you're making a prediction. So if you don't exactly predict it, we don't have a significant risk. So we could probably start predicting it, create a measurement loop, and then over time, it would get better at doing something. Also, sales forecasting, it might be an internal product, so you might be able to manage it as opposed to something external customer facing where you don't get as many opportunities to manage it. Anybody else want to? Yeah, you're a no. Hit me.
So this is my bread and butter.
Okay.
It's garbage in, garbage out. If you have very inconsistent activity data, you don't know what you're predicting.
Yeah.
And especially with CRMs, what you see is like a lot of people just gonna key it in with the ink already driving the deal. So
Yeah.
you might have a lot of like bias towards success.
Yeah.
You just don't know. I
Yeah.
once ran the experiment on what is a sales cycle in my company. It was -1 day. And I showed up to the CEO, and the CEO was like, that's not possible. It's like, I know, it's not possible. But you know.
Okay, so we have a CRM expert among us, and that a lot of people in these have a bias towards success, and so often they're coming back. And I think a lot of times, traditionally, when we've talked about CRMs, a lot of times what we're focusing is on how did the rep interpret that conversation. A rep whose primary or perhaps entire compensation is based on that, and then there's scores and who's going to get called out in the sales meeting. Where if you were be able to do some more observations by looking at web interactions or communications or transcripts of meetings, you might actually have to be able to have a more nuanced view of what that is. I'm an advisor to a company that does that with professional services organizations. So I'm going to go backwards. Anybody else have one they came across, they heard, what they thought was, wow, that's particularly good or particularly bad? Yes?
It's what I was thinking of the last one is it's having worked with salespeople and worked on strategy. Well, it's kind of juice isn't worth the squeeze because you're not ever going to get a good predictor with inconsistent data. You're not ever going to be able to create a model that's accurate enough to give good predictions.
Oh.
With variable amounts of input from sales. Because
Yeah.
there are too many factors and you
Yeah.
can't force salespeople or other people to give you consistent data.
Yeah.
So you're going to spend a lot of time and money trying to get a sales forecast that some guys who've been doing sales for 20 years can just tell you.
Yeah. So that's a really good example. So what we heard is that it was around in sales, there's so many variables and so many ins and outs that you're never going to get quite a good prediction. And someone who has a lot of experience can probably gut check it more effectively. And my sales expert is also nodding his head, so I think he agrees with you. Cool. So folks can come on. So let's talk a little bit about the process. So like you've got an idea. how do we want to go this? And I think what I've heard from a lot of people in AI and ML is that like a traditional software, SDLC, agile, God help you, safe, process is not going to be typically effective from an ML project. So we've been trying to, I've been playing around trying to reimagine what this process would be looking like. And I want the AI and ML team to be involved because so many times they get thrown over the wall. Here's what we want to do without ever getting to participate in that conversation. But I also have to, understand they're incredibly expensive. So they can't be in like, sticky note fun time meetings all the time. And so, we start with the strategy and then we want to go into a cycle where we're exploring and generating ideas, prototyping and testing and evaluating. And we might have some of the AI team come in for explore ideas and we'll have them come in evaluation. But when it comes to prototyping and testing, I'm going to recommend something different. And from there, we get to a decision point and we define what that use case is. So what we're giving to our teams, we are setting them up for success because we've gone through the process. So when it comes to strategy, kind of a similar idea, like make a strategy map. So if you don't exactly know what strategy or what your team wants to do, try and put it together. So our strategic objective is to be able to get a certain number of customers adopting we want customers to use this new feature because if they use this new feature, I can now sell the feature to another department. So I'm a designer by education. You might have heard a couple of years ago, Figma came out with dev mode. Okay, a Figma editor seat was $800 for enterprise. If we can sell them to developers, it's $420 a year. So it's a way to generate a lot more revenue without ever jacking up the prices, except you kind of did. And here, so our strategic objective is we want to launch dev mode because it allows us to get new revenue. So then I'm thinking about, okay, well, what can we do with our product to make it more friendly for developers? What data do we have that's uniquely interesting to them? Or what can we do with AI and ML? And so we're making sure that we're thinking across all these things to bring it. And if you kind of have one of these maps together, it becomes a lot easier to explain. Because like we heard, a lot of people struggle to communicate strategy. And you struggle to get it in your head in a way that works. So you can kind of sit down and map it out and piece it together and take this kind of early rough draft to your leadership to be able to go through it. Now, a lot of times in prototyping, by the way, this is what I asked Dolly to explain the prototyping concept using mid-century modern. I don't know. I didn't have any other image for that. But prototyping still really matters. Like we kind of got into this thing where we didn't like design thinking anymore. And we've said, because we want to do AI, we need all these data scientists. All of them are clamoring for things like, could you just, a lot of projects, and I've talked to people who've run them, they're getting to these projects and there's a misalignment of expectations from the leadership and the ML and AI team. And I'm seeing some because we don't actually know what, our leaders have come up with this vision for like this amazing thing that they want. And then the AI team's like, I can do this. And it's not aligned. And we don't even know if people want it. So like good old fashioned prototyping needs to come back in a big way. That I'm actually making make a landing page, make a Figma mock-up, make you could do a light coding model, do some things to kind of play it out and make sure that when we're looking at it, it's gonna make a value for our customers, for our business, and we're all gonna look at it and like, okay, we totally get it. And if you give us $2 million in 5 years, I can do that for you. Because then you're making a more informed decision. Or to say, okay, well, what would the 1 year and a $1.5 million version be? And we're like, well, we think it's this. And then we can actually see it as valuable. So, yeah, please.
Question, if your company's still starting out in the AI space, do you recommend building the team in-house or bringing in external expertise?
Okay, so the question is, if you're starting out, do you bring in internal or external? I think there are reasons why you could do both. If let's say you want external. The value of doing external is you're able to buy expertise There's a friend in here, Rotational Labs. They do this. They're an interesting company, and there's a lot of them other. If you get the external company, they have a lot of expertise that's readily available. They kind of maybe have a process that they use to work with clients. It's going to be more expensive. The challenge that you're going to have externally is that they may not fully understand or be bought into your vision. And if your vision is shifting and molding and changing, like that's going to make that project more expensive for them and for you, and that may or may not work. So if you have and do you know how to integrate with external partners? Like I spent 7 years in a services company, so I've been on both sides of this. And like learning to work with outside partners in and of itself is a skill set. Internally, the benefit is you're going to be able to like be more iterative and be more flexible and try things out. And you may be able to try, but you're going to hit a wall of expertise at some point. And things are going to be a little funky, and you're going to have to declare that debt and deal with it. So it's not so much is one way right or the other. It's more kind of like what's your situation and what are you going to do, and then how are you going to manage your downside risk? Because they both have upsides and downsides. Okay, so the last thing is once we've tested, we have, like, how do we define it? And so again, these are the things, I think it's important to start with story. I'm obsessed with storytelling. Again, I have all the links and this worksheet online for you. And here are, what do we have? What's the objective? What's the alignment? What are the impacts? How do we think about this from a compliance situation? And we really put this together in one very tight, very well-written thing and you're gonna have to workshop this sucker. So like, I might try my pitch for this 5 different times. It will be different ones because I need to dial it in. I need to workshop that and try it until I've got it super, super clear, and I've started to build buy-in throughout my organization, and then I can get to it. So my challenge to you in today is to really think about what is something that you think your organization would really benefit from AI, and to try and figure out what would that initial pitch to start a project look like, and see if you can actually tell a story of value and tell a story about how we can make things easier and better, which would take advantage of all the things that make for a good AI use case. So let me skip here. So a couple things. One, if you want the slides, the links, oh, I'm doing okay on time. Any of the citations, that's the one over here. If you work in cloud infrastructure, DevOps, and you'd be open to user research, I would love to talk to you, and you can book time on the other one. So what questions do we have, gang?